Hello, and thank you for watching this presentation about flying in Antarctica. My name is Robert Tuttell, and I'm a retired naval aviator who flew down in Antarctica from 1983 to 1986. I'll be showing you some penguin videos, and then talk about flying cargo planes in Antarctica. The locations of New Zealand, Australia, and the continent of Antarctica, as well as the McMurdo and South Pole stations, are shown on the slide. Most of us that went down to Antarctica called the continent of Antarctica the ice. Here are some penguin videos. The emperor penguins are the big ones, and the Adelie penguins are the small ones. The orca killer whales are also in the water, so it might not be a good day for the penguins to go swimming. Everyone knows Antarctica is very cold, but it is also very windy and the air is very dry. The continent is almost completely covered with a thick sheet of ice and snow and is larger than the entire continental United States. My Navy squadron supported Operation Deep Freeze by flying cargo, fuel, and passengers to Antarctic stations and science camps in support of the National Science Foundation. Navy Squadron VX-6, later renamed VXE-6, flew many different airplanes over the 44 years they performed the deep freeze missions on the ice. In the 1980s, we flew large LC-130 Hercules airplanes for the long-range missions, and other crew members flew the UH-1N Huey helicopters for the short-range logistics and scientific missions. Our LC-130s had wheels and skis so we could land on runways, skiways, and even land on unprepared snow areas in remote locations to support science camp missions. The squadron was known as the Puckered Penguins and later renamed the VXE-6 Ice Pirates. Two very historic flying milestones were achieved by naval aviators in Antarctica. First, Admiral Richard Byrd and his crew made the first flyover of the South Pole by an airplane in 1929. Secondly, in 1956, Lieutenant Commander Conrad Gus Shinn from VX-6 made the first landing at the South Pole. That plane now hangs in the National Museum of Naval Aviation in Pensacola, Florida. It is a long trip from our base in California to Antarctica, and the LC-130 with skis does not fly very fast. We refueled in Hawaii and Pago Pago in American Samoa, and then finally landed in Christchurch, New Zealand. We had a few days in Christchurch each year before we headed down to McMurdo. We flew to the ice in September every year and came home in February because that is the summer season in Antarctica when the sun is above the horizon 24 hours a day. All of us in the squadron miss the Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays every year with our families due to the deployment to the ice. In the 1980s, there were no cell phones or email capability at our base, so we just had to rely on mailed letters to communicate with home. Unfortunately, mail deliveries only happened if we had airplanes flying to or from Christchurch. The McMurdo Galley always made a great effort to serve us all some very good meals on those two big holidays, since they knew we were missing our families. McMurdo was our home on the ice in the 1980s and was the largest station in Antarctica. It was also the gateway for our air support missions to the rest of the continent. At that time, there were only about 1,000 people living in McMurdo during the Antarctic summer season, and roughly 180 would stay and winter over as our last LC-130s left in February to head home to California. This is a satellite view of the McMurdo area. Notice the active volcano, Mount Erebus, near the station. The video is a flyover of the base late in the season because you will see some of the ice is melted after the Coast Guard icebreakers break up the ice to allow the cargo ships to get to the station. Here are two videos showing normal LC-130 operations. In the first video, the aircraft has to land with a nose ski malfunction. The LC-130 was a very rugged airplane, but flying on the ice was hard on it. The LC-130s also flew long-distance cargo missions to resupply several Antarctic bases like the South Pole. We also flew science camp missions where we would land in remote areas on unprepared surfaces to drop off the scientists and their equipment. We would return later in the season to pick them up, along with all the samples the scientists collected, such as ice cores, rocks, and meteorites. Those types of missions were the most fun, but also the most hazardous. The Williams Field Skiway and the ice runway were located several miles away from McMurdo. When the wind started blowing the dry snow around, visibility would go to zero, and we had no airfield to go to as an alternate if we couldn't land when returning to McMurdo. If that happened, you would have to land your airplane on instruments in the whiteout area shown on the approach plate on the right. Crew coordination was critical doing whiteout landings. Here is a video showing our squadron's helicopter operations. Our helo crews flew similar cargo and science support missions like the LC-130s, but much closer to McMurdo Station. These crews spent more time with the scientists after landing than we did and visited some of the penguin rookeries. They also flew many helo missions into the dry valleys, which is an area where the ground is not fully covered with ice and snow. This video shows our hardworking VXE-6 LC-130 maintenance personnel doing repairs and routine maintenance in frigid weather conditions. We did not have any hangars for the LC-130s on the ice, so it was very difficult conditions to work in. It was amazing they could repair so many things on the ice. Visibility issues were a major hazard for all of us flying on the ice. When the sky, the landing area, and the surrounding terrain are all white, it's hard to see where it's safe to land. The video shows a landing on a good visibility day.
Break 3. 130 down 6. Break 2. 125.
This accident happened while I was in the squadron on December 28, 1984, and shows how hard it is to see buried crevasse fields. We had techniques we used to minimize the risks, such as ski drags before making a landing, but sometimes things would go wrong. This airplane fell into a crevasse on the Starshot Glacier, but luckily none of the crew were hurt. We flew numerous missions out to the glacier with maintenance personnel and repair parts. We set up a remote camp to fix the plane after pulling it out of the crevasse. 14 days later, the plane flew back to McMurdo after a lot of hard work by a lot of people. This video shows a plane landing at our squadron maintenance base in Christchurch. Those squadron personnel working there performed a critical function doing complicated repairs resulting from the damage caused by the harsh operating conditions on the ice. They also performed the required periodic inspections on the LC-130. The ski experts in Christchurch would fix any of our LC-130 ski problems because the skis could not be repaired on the ice. We all love to go to Christchurch and spend time there when we got a chance. It was dangerous flying in Antarctica in the 1980s, and even today with GPS navigation, it is still very dangerous to fly for many reasons, including those listed on the slide. The year after I left the squadron in 1987, an LC-130 crashed during an approach to a remote location. 2 Navy personnel were killed and many others were injured, including aircrew that I had flown with the year before. Over the years, we lost 25 Navy and 1 Marine squadron mates performing the deep freeze mission. In honor of those lost, I am playing the aviation verse of the Navy hymn. This is a difficult accident to discuss, but the story needs to be told. As bad as our naval aviation accidents were, the worst accident on the ice happened in 1979 when an Air New Zealand sightseeing flight had a navigational issue and crashed into the side of the Mount Erebus volcano near McMurdo. It killed 237 passengers and 20 crew members. It was the worst New Zealand air disaster ever. The Amundsen Scott South Pole is the other major United States station in Antarctica and is named for the first 2 explorers who set foot on the South Pole in the early 1900s. Important science is conducted at the South Pole, especially in the field of atmospheric science, astronomy, and physics. The elevation at the pole is 9,300 feet above sea level, and the yearly temperature averages a minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit. In the 1980s, when I flew down there, everyone lived and worked in small buildings located under a dome that had been built by the United States Navy Seabees. In 2010, a new large main building was completed in order to accommodate many more people to support the important science work going on at the station. In 1983, I took the opportunity to get my picture taken at the ceremonial South Pole on a very cold but clear day. On another personal note, in 2012 I was notified that the U.S. Board of Geographic Names had named a cape in Antarctica after me for my contributions to the Operation Deep Freeze mission. It is called Tuttell Point, and it's located on Held Island. In 1999, the United States Air National Guard out of New York took over the Operation Deep Freeze mission from the U.S. Navy. They also flew ski-equipped LC-130s and had been flying in Greenland for many years. The Navy's older C-130s were flown out to the boneyard in Arizona. Over the 44 years VX-6 and VXE-6 performed the missions in Antarctica, they moved millions of pounds of fuel and cargo and almost 200,000 scientists and passengers around Antarctica. All military personnel love to come home to their families after a long overseas deployment. This was the final homecoming for VXE-6 in 1999. I still fondly remember my 3 homecomings from the ice. I remember how happy I was to see my wife and my children, and was always amazed at how much my children had grown while I was gone. Many of the photos and videos in this presentation came from a DVD that the 1999 Ice Pirates made for all of us who had served in the squadron over the 44 years. Thank you to them. May they all have fair winds and following seas. Thanks for watching, and I hope you've learned something about flying in Antarctica. This presentation is dedicated to my squadron mates in VX-6 and VXE-6, and to all the men and women who have gone to Antarctica from many countries to support the important science missions being done there. Thank you.